A very good Wednesday morning to you. I'm Jim Sciutto in New York.
And I'm Poppy Harlow live this morning from Houston, Texas. Good morning, everyone. He is in. Sources telling CNN the president now intends to sign the border deal to avert another government shutdown.
Just one day ago, the president said that he was not happy with this agreement, which includes only a fraction of the billions of dollars that he has demanded for a wall on the border and, of course, shut the government down for. So the big question is now, how will the president get those funds? CNN's Dana Bash breaking all the news this morning. She joins us now. Dana, it's your reporting that the president intends to sign this deal. What's his thinking?
Well, this is according to two sources who have spoken with the president, that is his intention to sign this deal once it gets through Congress, which hasn't even started to happen yet. We should note that. It has to obviously be passed by the House and Senate, get to his desk. He will sign it for several reasons. What he's saying privately matches really, frankly, with what he's been saying publicly, that he doesn't like it. He realizes that he didn't get what he wanted at all, but that he is going to blame Congress for not doing its job. And he is also going to keep the fight going. He is going to keep the political fight and even the policy fight going. On the policy side, as we've been talking about for a few weeks now, he has been working with the administration on finding pots of money. We have even been specific, pots of money from the Department of Homeland Security, from the Pentagon, to use his own authority to put more money in to build the wall. And the other thing he is still thinking about, I'm told, is a national emergency, which is a different level of executive action that would have a lot more pushback from even his own party. We've already seen that pushback from people like Mitch McConnell, again, publicly and privately, saying to the president that's a bad idea. But big picture, the president realizes a shutdown again is bad. It was a mistake. It was a disaster for many reasons, and he needs to move on.
Dana Bash, thank you. It's interesting, Poppy, that blame Congress talking point. You're already hearing Mark Meadows was using it this morning. He happens to be a member of Congress, but right. That seems to be the spin at this point.
Right. Yeah, it does. That's a good point. So let's go to Capitol Hill and talk about Congress. CNN has learned that the legislative text for the border funding deal is not finished yet. Sunlen Safadi has the details. Good morning, Sunlen. So you heard Jim's point, which is a good one. When do lawmakers expect to be done with this?
Well, time certainly is of the essence up here on Capitol Hill, Poppy. The staff members, they are working behind the scenes as quickly as possible to turn this actual deal, to put pen to paper and turn it into actual legislative text. And that does indeed take some time. Now, I'm told this morning from sources that that bill is still not completed, that they are still in the process of writing it. The hope is that they can get something final and posted tonight by this afternoon at the very earliest. But there are already talks in the works here in case they are not able to make that unofficial deadline tonight. Talks about potentially waiving the so-called 72-hour rule. That is a rule in the House that allows members 3 days to go through, absorb, read actual legislation before they vote on it. The fact that that might not be a luxury here, the fact is that House Democrats are considering waiving it. That really speaks to the fact that they are trying to move very quickly through this, and the emphasis is, of course, on avoiding that midnight deadline on Friday, not going into another government shutdown. So another indication they're trying to move very quickly through this when they actually get that bill text. Now, Republicans up here on Capitol Hill, both privately and publicly, are urging President Trump to sign this deal. And we heard from Richard Shelby, a top Republican that negotiating this deal. He spoke with President Trump on the phone yesterday. Here's what he said after that conversation.
I said, Mr. President, this is only a down payment on the wall. I said, they said you weren't going to get any money. We did get you some money. The president's tone and conversation was very good. Concerned that he didn't get everything he wanted, and I told him I shared that.
And we're hearing that language a lot from Republicans up here on the Hill, that down payment word, the feeling that this might not be what everyone wanted and what everyone hoped that they would get in this deal, but they are urging President Trump to sign this and then have a conversation about whatever next steps you want to take. Poppy?
Yeah, and I think that's the definition, at least the unofficial one, of compromise, right? You don't get everything that you want. Sunlen, thanks very, very, very much, Jim.
Let's discuss now with Jackie Kucinich, Washington bureau chief for The Daily Beast, and Errol Lewis, political anchor for Spectrum News. Jackie, let's just test out that talking point there, down payment. We heard Republicans using that same language a couple of weeks ago. But the fact is, this is a smaller down payment on the wall than the president shut the government down for in December, the longest shutdown in American government history. Does that spin fly?
I mean, the president isn't getting what he wants here. It's very cut and dry. And right now, what you're hearing from Republicans are trying to rationalize how to get him to sign this because there is absolutely no appetite on the Hill for another government shutdown, and time, as was mentioned, is running short. So whatever they can do to massage this and to make it so palatable for the president, who has walked away from several deals that would have given him more money. And it's not going to get any better because the atmospherics in the House aren't changing. And again, the pressure on Republicans to not have this happen again isn't lessening either.
So, guys, let's take a moment and listen to some of the president. Listens to a lot. That is Sean Hannity on Fox News. Here's his take. Of course, this was last night before we learned this morning from Dana's reporting the president will sign it, but it's still relevant. Let's play it.
I'm not as concerned as some other conservatives if the president signs the bill, but there's a couple of ifs. And that would be the president would need to declare a national emergency. This is the time. That is a necessity.
Errol, what's your read? I mean, he could do that. We just don't know if he will do that. Does this give the president some cover from the far right?
Well, look, it creates about the most unhelpful dynamic one can imagine when people have spent weeks trying to compromise to try and bring the country back from the brink and to actually try and tackle issues around the border that have been festering, frankly, for decades. To have a kind of a media blowhard run out and make policy on his own and lead the president down that path is really very unhelpful. I will tell you also, though, Poppy, I mean, you've got another dynamic that we should not forget, which is that those 40,000 ICE beds are going to be a problem for Democrats because what that sounds like is expanded enforcement. There's been a lot of heated rhetoric around separated families, around the disruption that happens when ICE goes about its business. Hanging around courthouses, hanging around hospitals, hanging around schools, and yanking people out of communities. If that's going to continue, we're in for, whether it leads to a shutdown or not, a lot more conflict on this issue.
Jackie, so the options that the president is apparently discussing, perhaps at one end an emergency declaration, but right. Short of that is looking for other pots of money, things being discussed as disaster relief in Puerto Rico, Northern California, money intended for expanding military bases or improving military bases. We know there would be legal challenges to an emergency declaration. Will there be legal challenges, or will Congress challenge him if he attempts to take money away from other pots of money that Congress intended for other things, right? I mean, they didn't vote for the money to be used for the wall, so this is money intended to be used elsewhere. Will there be challenges for that?
The answer is yes, because every one of those projects not only has a congressman representing it, it has 2 senators. So, yes, there's going to be massive pushback from Congress. It's not as easy just to move this money around in the budget, particularly somewhere like the Pentagon, where these budgets tend to be lengthy. These projects tend to take a long time. So all of a sudden you start taking money out of some of these projects that were meant for one thing and putting it down to the border. That's going to create some problems. So the answer to your question, Jim, is absolutely yes. There are going to be challenges from Congress and perhaps in the courts as well.
Hey guys, on Jim's point, because of course Congress, controls the purse, or is supposed to. Let's talk about this out of the box idea. It comes from Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He suggested, Errol, on Twitter that the $14 billion that the feds are seeking from El Chapo, who of course yesterday was found guilty on all counts, could be used for this. Thoughts?
That's
well,
fun.
Look, I will tell you, I don't know that the government's going to get $14 billion, right? It's not as simple as sending a notice of a demand for restitution and then having a murderous drug cartel wire the money into the U.S. Treasury. So, the money's probably not going to
That's not how
arrive.
it works, Errol Lewis?
No, it's a little more complicated than that from what I hear. And, the amount that they are likely to get, I mean, one hopes that they will crack that cartel and get whatever restitution they can, but it's not going to be, there'll be several zeros short of $14 billion. That's for one thing. And then secondly, it goes into the general treasury, and Congress is going to have to vote for money. And so if they're going to be right back to where they started, wherever the money comes from, if the money fell out of the sky, you'd still have to have Congress appropriate it for a wall. And as we have seen, there's no consensus around whether or not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Jackie, it gets to the fundamental functioning of government, doesn't it, right? I mean, presidents still have to go to Congress based on the Constitution to get funding for legislation, for things that they want to legislate.
Well, and you've seen this Congress abdicate their authority on a whole realm of issues over the last couple of years. But this seems to have woken them up, and the legislative authority when it comes to appropriations is something they don't like to be challenged on, particularly now that you have Democrats in charge of the House. They're going to be a lot louder and a lot more aggressive in challenging the president's executive authority, particularly on this topic.
All right. Thank you both. Jackie Kucinich, Earl Lewis. We'll see you soon. A lot ahead for us this morning. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz has not even officially jumped in the 2020 race, but the buzz around his potential run is building, and so are all of the questions about where he really stands on the issues. Case in point, income taxes. How much does the billionaire potential candidate think he should be paying? I asked him just that.
It was quite a conversation last night, Poppy. Good to see you there across from him. Plus, this hour, goodwill is gone. The Senate Intel chair says just that about the president's former attorney and fixer Michael Cohen. He says Cohen has stiffed investigators on the Hill. And outrage building on both sides of the aisle after the White House misses the deadline to determine who was behind the death of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Senators working on legislation, and to be clear, Republicans and Democrats, to, quote, hold the administration's feet to the fire. We will have one of those senators ahead. It is still 629 days until the 2020 election, but you really wouldn't know it because this race is not just heating up. The growing list of Trump challengers is downright hot. We have a lot to get to, but first, potential independent candidate, billionaire Howard Schultz, facing the tough questions from my co-anchor and the audience last night at the CNN town hall.
And it wasn't just, as you know, Jim, from seeing it, what Schultz said last night. A lot of this is about what he did not say as well. So let's bring in our experts. CNN political analyst, my friend Mark Preston, who's been with me throughout in Houston, and CNN senior political writer and analyst Harry Enton in New York, breaking down the polls that we've seen on Schultz lately and more. So let's just pause for a moment and play this exchange with Schultz and myself last night about the key issue of taxes. Watch. You've just said twice, I should pay more taxes. And America's question, important question, was about personal income tax. How much should the wealthy pay in this country? You're a billionaire. Give me a sense. Are you talking about you should pay 2% higher, 10% higher, 20% higher federal income tax?
Poppy, I don't know what the number is. I think what I'm saying is we need comprehensive tax reform.
Ballpark it for people, because it makes a difference. Would it go up to, the rate under President Clinton, or are we talking about significantly higher?
What I think is what being proposed at 70% is a punitive number, and I think there are better ways to do this.
So what's not punitive?
I don't know what the number is, but what I'm suggesting is I should be paying higher taxes. And I think people across the country are willing to pay higher taxes, but there's a caveat there. And the caveat is this.
But is it higher than 2% more, for example?
I think it is, but let me just qualify this. That's very important. If you look at the American people and you ask them this following question, do you trust the government? Do you trust Congress? Most people in America say, I've lost trust and confidence in Congress and certainly in the president. And so when you ask people to pay more taxes, we have to make sure that there is a agreement that your additional tax dollars are going to be spent wisely by the government.
You said on 60 Minutes, Mr. Schultz, that you would release your tax returns today. Will you commit to releasing your tax returns this week?
Well, I'm not yet decided to run for president, but if I decide to run for president, I 100% will release my taxes and be completely transparent.
And here's why I ask.
Yeah.
Because I remember, we all remember May 2014, when now President Trump was mulling a bid for the White House, and he said exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but I think President Trump, unfortunately, has a habit of not being truthful. And I raise my hand to all of you, and I can promise you, not only will I pay my taxes, not only will I release my tax refund.
All right. So, Mark Preston, to you. This is somewhere where I thought we might get a number from him. And he's being slammed this morning by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, of course, has proposed that 70% marginal tax rate that Schultz thinks he hates it. He hates that. He's been clear about that. What's your read?
Well, a couple things. One is I don't agree with him that more people want to pay taxes and they're willing to pay taxes. If people look at their tax bill right now, regardless of how well the economy is doing and unemployment is low, people feel like they're overtaxed, right? So that's not the political message that he wants to go in with, specifically because he's trying to thread a needle of trying to get moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats to come together. And the fact that he didn't really offer specifics last night, specifically on this issue and other issues, I think was fine in some ways, but I do think in the long run could hurt him. People are looking for specifics right now, but it's not just him. They want specifics from all these candidates, and to try to differentiate yourself from this rather large field of people who want to challenge Donald Trump, whether it's the Democrats or whether it's Howard Schultz, you need to differentiate yourself. He did fine last night, but he didn't differentiate himself.
Harry Enton, what do the numbers show you so far about demand among voters for 2020 for an independent candidate? I mean, is there, first of all, demand for an independent, an option outside of the parties, but second of all, what do they say about Howard Schultz himself?
Not really. That there is not much of a demand for an independent candidate. Yeah, people don't tend to like the major parties, but at the end of the day, we are a two-party country. And with Howard Schultz specifically, look at our latest CNN poll. What you see in that poll is despite the fact that 44% of Americans haven't even heard of Schultz, among those who do, he has an overwhelmingly negative opinion. I believe his net favorable rating, that's favorable rating minus unfavorable rating, stands at negative 11 percentage points. That's really quite bad. That's a route where the president is, despite the fact that everyone knows who Donald Trump is. That many people already dislike Howard Schultz, or at least what they've heard about him.
Yeah, you have to wonder, Poppy, if Trump, to some degree, for some voters, spoiled the well for a billionaire businessman, right, as an option for president.
Right. And you heard him, Mark Preston, last night, really trying to differentiate himself from the president. You've got two white billionaires, businessmen from New York, different boroughs, I'll grant you that, Brooklyn and Queens. But look, Schultz ran a public company that the world could see the books of the company, very different from the Trump organization. What struck you most from what you heard in the hour last night?
You know, a couple things. He didn't offer specific policy proposals, but he was trying to create a bridge right now that is needed in this country. And I'm not saying that he's going to be successful, because I don't necessarily think our country was founded on the ability for someone like Howard Schultz or a third party, certainly at this time, to come in. That's going to get some people upset. I understand that. Okay. But the bottom line is what struck me is that there was nothing specific. When you asked him about taxes, and you said, going back to taxes, what do you think your tax rate should be? He said, listen, I think I should pay more in taxes. Well, clearly, you should have some kind of an idea about how much more in taxes you should pay. He didn't come up with an answer. He came out.
Healthcare, for example.
Healthcare said Medicare for all is not going to work, but he thinks that we should work to try to get healthcare for everybody. Veterans, he thinks we need to do stuff for veterans. Didn't offer specific policy proposals. Again, it's okay that he did it last night, but he's not going to be able to continue going on without offering some more depth to what he says that he can do.
I wonder if you got the sense that he's running or not.
I think after last night, he felt very good about himself and very well is probably closer to running after last night than not.
We'll see. Jim.
So Harry Enton, A.B. Klobuchar, another entrance to the race, generating some excitement because she comes from a Midwest state. She has taken some moderate positions as well, and she also said she wants to see universal health care. I wonder, in the polling data you've seen, are Democratic voters following the candidates left here? I mean, is that the kind of candidate that they are gravitating towards, someone who takes more progressive positions like that?
Well, I'll certainly say, obviously liberal voters are growing as a bloc of the Democratic Party, though people who self-describe themselves as moderate still make up a majority. I think if you look specifically at the healthcare polling, yeah, if you ask it sort of in the abstract, people would like universal coverage. But I think they're more concentrated at this particular point on improving and expanding Obamacare. And I do think if you further look at the polling, what you see is electability is more important than issue agreement. And of course, you tend to be more electable if you are in the center of the electorate. That's what political science literature tells us. So I do think the sort of leftward movement in this Democratic field does leave room for a more moderate candidate, one who voters believe is more electable.
Harriet and Mark Preston, thanks very much. Presidential candidate and senator, she's going to sit down with our colleague Don Lemon for a town hall with New Hampshire voters. That's going to be at 10 o'clock Eastern time, only here on CNN.
Looking forward to that. Also, President Trump intends to back the bipartisan deal to avoid a shutdown. It doesn't have nearly all the money he wanted for the border wall, so what will he do next?
This is CNN Breaking News.
I can assure you that any goodwill that might have existed in the committee with Michael Cohen is now gone.
The Senate Intelligence Committee chairman slamming President Trump's former fixer for, quote, stiffing Congress, is talking about Michael Cohen, who has now delayed, Jim, a third planned appearance on the Hill.
Yeah, Cohen's attorney defending that delay, saying in part, quote, that Mr. Cohen was expected to and continues to suffer from severe post-surgery shoulder pain. Let's bring in CNN reporter Kara Scannell. So, Kara, what's going on here? I mean, it's the third time. Once the delay because it was in the interest of the investigation. Now it's health reasons. I mean, is there concern here that he's trying to dodge the testimony altogether?
Well, I mean, that's the question. You can see the frustration in Senator Burr there in that soundbite you just played, because it's the third delay that Cohen has had. The first time was actually because he said, he felt threatened by statements that President Trump had made. Then the investigation, as you mentioned, and then this delay on the eve of his testimony, which was supposed to take place yesterday. Now, Cohen's attorney, Lenny Davis, has said that Cohen is committed to testify voluntarily before all three committees. That would be 2 private sessions and 1 session in the public by the end of the month. But, there's 2 weeks left by the end of the month, and then Cohen reports to prison on March 6th. So the clock is ticking if Cohen is going to testify according to his new self-imposed deadline, and if there are any other, issues or excuses that he has for why he doesn't want to come in, Jim.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Kara, March 6th is fast approaching. Talk to us about how big a deal this is in terms of how much Congress needs this testimony, because this, further planned testimony from Michael Cohen is one of the things that Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat, said that they need, and that's why he differs with Burr on where they stand on this investigation and the findings.
That's right, Poppy. I mean, Michael Cohen, remember, he lied when he went in and testified before the Senate Intel Committee in the fall of 2017. So now that committee especially wants him to come back and answer these questions truthfully. There's also been, in that long period of time, a lot of other interviews that they've conducted. So they likely have a lot of follow-up questions that they want to put to him, especially as more comes to light, including what he lied about, where he said, the conversations between Russians about Trump Tower had ended, right before the caucuses kicked off in January of 2016, when in fact he said that these continued much longer. So they have a lot of follow-up questions that they want to do with him, Poppy.
He's a central witness, no question. Kara Scannell, thanks very much. We're just days away from another potential shutdown. Is the president really set to sign a deal that he says he's not happy about to avoid that shutdown? We'll have more next.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome back. Sources are telling CNN this morning that the president intends to accept the bipartisan deal on the table to keep the government open. This despite the fact that it does not include the money that he has demanded for a wall along the border. Joining me now is White House Director of Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp. Thanks very much, Mercedes, for taking the time this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So you heard CNN's reporting, but Sarah Sanders just a short time ago told reporters the president has not yet decided. What's the answer? Will the president sign this agreement?
Well, look, the president's reviewing the final details. As we know, you got to look at the fine print in these details that are coming through. Congress themselves have to finish up the conference report. So we're right now at a point that we're going to be reviewing the details and seeing what if the president will move forward and sign it. You know, obviously the president's not happy with the funding levels right now, and you know, he would look at alternative funding to ensure that we're able to secure the resources that we need to fulfill his promise to the American people of securing the border.
Is he not happy enough to shut the government down again?
Look, the president is not interested in shutting the government down. At this point, what we do know is that we went from Speaker Pelosi saying that she wouldn't even give $1 for the wall to right now that there being about $1.4 billion in this negotiated package. We got to look to see what that includes. Will it include restrictions, non-restrictions? Will they allow Border Patrol agents and officers to decide where they should build based on their analysis? And so there's a lot of these open-ended questions that we need answers to. And again, we'll be reviewing those details.
You're right that Nancy Pelosi had said not $1, and this does include just under $1.4 billion. But as you know, the proposal that was on the table prior to the shutdown in December included $1.6 billion, actually more money. It begs the question, why did the president shut the government down then to then consider a proposal that includes less money than was presented 2 months ago?
Look, the president wanted to give Congress one more shot. As we know, the Democrats in January didn't necessarily want to focus on this topic of border security, but the president has spent several months talking about this issue, talking about how the border is a humanitarian and a security crisis, where we've dealt with incoming criminals, drug cartels, gang members who have crossed the border. And the key is that our Border Patrol agents are asking for help. They need operational support on the southern border, and it's why the president has worked closely to ensure that we can get the resources that we need. We know how Congress is and how it functions. You know, we've had the Democrats at one point, House Democrats, pushing forward an extreme proposal on, for example, reducing the number of ICE detention beds, which negatively impacts law enforcement. So again, part of it is this negotiation process. We're going to see what they come up with. If they fall short, which it looks like they might be, then if the president will look into alternative administrative funds to get the resources needed to build these physical barriers, as well as ensure that, for example, that our ICE agents also have what they need and local law enforcement have what they need.
Let's talk about some of these alternative sources. Disaster relief funds intended for California and Puerto Rico. Northern California, the fires. Puerto Rico, of course, a devastating storm, thousands killed. Department of Defense funds for military construction. If the president takes money from these pots, as it were, will he explain to the American people why residents in California, Puerto Rico don't need that disaster relief? Why the Defense Department doesn't need the money for construction?
Jim, I think you're jumping the gun. I think that, you know, the president has made it clear that it's not coming from disaster relief funds. He's looking at different pots of administrative funds that could be used for the purposes of securing the border. I'm not going to get into the details of where the money is going to come from. It's obviously something that our lawyers are looking into. And so at this point, the goal is to get to that number, which is the physical barrier number, which our Border Patrol agents have said is the money they need to be able to gain operational control of our southern border. Also, we want to make sure that we're able to prioritize based on what our agents are telling us at the border are the poorest, vulnerable areas that we need to make sure have those physical barriers that, as we know, and as many Democrats have said, actually work.
Just to be clear, though, you're saying the president has not decided yet to sign this agreement, that it's still possible that he will go back to Congress and say, not good enough.
Well, I think he's reviewing the details. I mean, at this point, this is a matter of looking at the fine print. This is a matter of looking to see what other, if any, restrictions they are putting into this package. And so we want to make sure that we're well informed and ready to make this decision. The president's not interested in shutting down the government, but he is interested in ensuring that our border gets secure, that making sure our communities are safe. I mean, I've spoken to sheriffs, local law enforcement that talk about the public safety threat, what we need to do to ensure that we reduce human traffickers from coming into this country, where we don't allow smugglers and coyotes to abuse our immigration laws. And that is a priority for this administration.
Let me ask you this on another topic. Last Friday, the administration blew by a congressionally imposed deadline imposed by bipartisan votes in Congress to report back on who this administration holds responsible for the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. I spoke to Republican Senator James Lankford on this broadcast yesterday. He said the administration is not meeting its legal obligations under the Magnitsky Act. Why not?
You know, this Khashoggi incident was incredibly tragic. The president took action, put sanctions on a number of Saudi individuals who were responsible for this horrific incident. And here we are, we're waiting for the thorough and complete review to come out. I'd have to refer you to the State Department in terms of timing.
Yeah, but the president, the Congress required the White House to report back. Gave him 120 days. That's as required by law. And the White House did not report back. I mean, that's a legal requirement. What is the Trump administration waiting for?
We are waiting for the complete review. Obviously, this is a thorough process that needs to take place, and we're working through it. And again, I'd have to refer you to the State Department for specific details.
Final question, just before I let you go. Both the president and the vice president in the last 24 hours are calling for the Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to resign for comments that many saw as anti-Semitic. I wonder, will the president similarly call for the resignation of Congressman Steve King, who, as you know, defended in public comments white nationalism? Will he call for his resignation?
Yeah, I have to say that Congresswoman Omar's comments are horrific. I mean, the mere fact that we know that anti-Semitism has no place in Congress, the mere fact that she's attacked the Jewish people, that she's attacked the state of Israel, that then she goes and has a continual pattern of this is very disturbing. And it is why he called for not only her resignation, but for resigning from the Foreign Affairs Committee. You know, the president was critical of Steve King. He applauded Congress when they took action to strip him from his committee position. And in essence, we don't have, there's no room for anti-Semitism. There is no room for white nationalism remarks coming from any of these members of Congress.
Fair enough, but then why not hold Steve King to the same standard? I mean, he's repeated.
Look, we were very tough on Steve King.
Nazi comments, retweeted them. He's talked about white nationalism.
But when you look at Congresswoman Omar and her comments, I mean, they're appalling, and she should resign from the Foreign Affairs Committee, which actually is one that deals directly with issues regarding Israel. And obviously, we know where her bias lies.
Mercedes Schlapp, thanks very much for taking the questions this morning.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Jim, that was a fascinating interview. I mean, you're push to get those answers there. I mean, especially on Khashoggi, right? And the legal deadline there that the White House just blew by, Jim.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that I mean, they have an answer, but the answer is not satisfying even Republican members of both the House and the Senate there. It's something, and it's possible that they will face bipartisan legislation. You got an interview coming up with one of the senators pushing that.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So we will speak with the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Menendez. Next, we'll have him respond to what you just heard from Mercedes Schlapp. We're back in a moment.